What's her game? She keeps kissing me and coming back to my room at night. What's her game? The long con, I see. He's having an existential crisis, too. He's very relatable, but also very scary. What does he really want? Yeah. What does she really want? In reality, how old are they? They're like 60. But they just took the vaccine, so they're going to be 60 forever. The dream has been realized. The average age of the first 100 in 2027, the average age of the first 100 people on Mars was 45. So there were some outliers on both ends, but now they are in Martian year 15, which is like 20 years on Earth, because the Martian year is a little bit longer. So it's been like 20 years, and they were like, the average age was like 45. So they're all around 60-ish. 65 even. The average age of the first 100 is 65. But it's a young 65. Their life expectancy is now like 200. In reality, they were all actors all the time, playing their video parts, and there was no chance of contact with the true selves inside others. Not anymore. Over the long years, their parts had hardened into shells, and the selves inside had atrophied or wandered off and gotten lost. And now they were all hollow. Immortal boomers, the horror. Worse, dude, they're immortal millennials. Younger than the average age of Congress, sure. And now they were all hollow. Or perhaps it was just him. Because she seemed so real. Her laughter, her white hair, her passion, my God. Her sweaty skin and the ribs underneath it. Ooh. Ribs that slid back and forth under his fingers like the slats of a fence. She was skinny, folks. Ribs that clamped down on the paroxysms of orgasm. A true self. Didn't it have to be so? Didn't it? He could hardly believe otherwise. A true self. But sadly deceived. One morning he awoke from a dream of John. It was from their time together on the space station, when they had been young. Except in the dream they had been old. And John had not died, and yet he had. He spoke as a ghost, aware that he had died and that Frank had killed him. Yet aware also of everything that had happened since, and free of all anger or blame. It was just something that had happened. Like the time John had gotten the first landing assignment, or had taken Maya away on the Ares. A lot of things had happened between them, one way or another. But they were still friends. Still brothers. They could talk. They understood each other. Feeling the horror of that, Frank had groaned through the dream. and tried to fold in on himself and awakened. It's literally making me feel sick. Like my stomach is turning. Feeling the horror of that, Frank had groaned through the dream and tried to fold in on himself and awakened. It was hot. His skin was sweaty. Maya was sitting up, her hair wild, her breasts swinging loosely between her arms. "What's wrong?" she was saying. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he cried, and got up and padded to the bathroom. But she came after him, put her arms on him, put her hands on him. "Frank, what was it?" "Nothing," he shouted, involuntarily jerking out of her grip. "Can't you leave me alone?" "Of course," she said, hurt. A flush of anger. "Of course I can." And she walked out of the bathroom. "Of course you can," he shouted after her, suddenly furious at her stupidity, to be so ignorant of him, so vulnerable to him, when it was all an act anyway. "Now that you've got what you want from me." "What does that mean?" she said, reappearing instantly in the bathroom doorway, a sheet around her. "You know what I mean," he said bitterly. "You've got what you wanted from the treaty, haven't you? And you never would have without me." She stood there, hands on her hips, watching him. The sheet was loose around her hips, and she looked like the French figure of liberty, very beautiful and very dangerous. Her mouth a tight line. She shook her head in disgust and walked away. "You haven't the faintest idea, do you?" she said. He followed her. "What do you mean?" She threw the sheet away and stepped violently into her underwear, yanked it up over her bottom. As she dressed, she hurled short sentences at him. "You don't know anything about what other people think. You don't even know what you think. What do you want out of the treaty? You, Frank Chalmers. You don't know. It's only what I want, or what Sachs wants, or what Helmut wants. What any of them want, you yourself have no opinion. Whatever is easiest to manage. Whatever leaves you in control at the end. And as for feelings..." She was dressed, standing at the door. She stopped to glare at him. A look like a lightning strike. He had been standing there too stunned to move, and so now he stood there naked before her, exposed to the full blast of her scorn. "You don't have any feelings, do you? I've tried, believe me, but you just..." She shuddered, apparently unable to think of words vile enough to describe him. Hollow, he wanted to say. Empty. An act. And yet, she walked out. So when they signed the new treaty, Maya was not at his side. Not even in Burroughs, which was a relief in many ways, really. And yet he could not help but feel empty and cold in the chest. And certainly the others of the first 100, at least, knew something had happened between them. Again, which was infuriating, or so he told himself. They signed the thing in the same conference room they had hammered it out in. with Helmut doing the honors with a big smile. And each delegate coming up in turn, in penguin suit or black evening gown, to say a few words for the cameras and then put their hand to the document. A gesture that only Frank seemed to see as bizarrely archaic, like scratching a petroglyph. Ridiculous. When it was his turn, he went up and said something about striking a balance, which was exactly it. He had arranged the competing interests to strike each other at angles, to strike together at angles that matched their momentum exactly, arranging a traffic accident so that all the vehicles would collide into a single solidified mass. The result was something not all that dissimilar to the previous version of the treaty, with both emigration and investment, the two main threats to the status quo, if there was such a thing on Mars, mostly blocked. And this was the clever part. Blocked by each other. It was a good piece of work. And he signed with a flourish. "For the United States of America," he announced emphatically, glaring around the world intently. That would play well on vid. So he strode through the subsequent parade with the cold satisfaction of work well done. The grass-floored tents and the walk tubes of the city were crowded with thousands of spectators, and the parade wound through them, wandering down the big canal-side tent, with diversions up into the mesas, coming back down and crossing every canal bridge to cheers, and proceeding up to Princess Park for a great street party. The weather people had set for cool and crisp, with brisk downslope winds. Kites dueled under the tent roofs like raptors, their colors bright against the dark pink afternoon sky. Thanks. Frank found the party in the park unsettling. There were too many people watching him. Too many who wanted to approach him and talk. That was fame. He talked to groups. So he turned around and walked back up the canal side tent. Two parallel rows of white pillars ran down the sides of the canal. Each pillar was a Barris column. Barris. Each pillar was a Barris column, semicircular at the top and bottom, but with the hemispheres rotated 180 degrees to each other. This simple maneuver created pillars that looked completely different depending on where you were when you looked at them. And the two rows of these pillars had a strange tumble-down look, as if they were already ruins, although the smoothness and the whiteness of their diamond-coated salt belied that. They stood off the grass as white as sugar cubes and gleamed as if wet. Frank walked between the rows, touching each pillar in turn. Above them, on each side, the valley slopes rose to the window-walled bluffs of mesas. Massed greenery showed behind these cliffs of untinted glass, so that it looked as if the city were rimmed by enormous terrariums. A really elegant ant farm. The part of the valley slope under tenting was dotted with trees and tile roofs, and cut by broad grassy boulevards. The uncovered part was still a red rocky plain. A great number of buildings were just being finished, or still under construction. There were cranes everywhere, rearing up towards the tent roofs, a kind of odd, colorful, skeletal statuary. Also, scores of scaffolded buildings, so that Helmut had said the tented hillsides reminded him of Switzerland. No surprise, since most of the construction was being done by the Swiss. They scaffold a house to replace a window box. Saxe Russell was standing at the foot of one of these scaffolded buildings, looking up at it critically. Frank turned and walked up a tube to him, said hello. There's twice as much support as they need, Saxe said. Maybe more. The Swiss like that. Saxe nodded. They stared at the building. Well, Frank said, what do you think? The treaty? It will reduce support for terraforming, Saxe said. People are more inclined to invest than to give. Frank scowled. Not all investment is good for terraforming, Saxe. You have to remember that. A lot of that money is spent on other things entirely. But terraforming is a way to reduce overheads, you see. A certain percentage of the total investment will always be devoted to it. So I want the total as high as possible. Real benefits can only be calculated using real costs, Frank said. All the real costs. Terran economics never bothered to do that. But you're a scientist, and you should. You have to judge the environmental damage from higher population and activity, as well as the benefits to terraforming that go along with it. Better to up the investment devoted to pure terraforming rather than compromising and taking a percentage of a total that in some ways is working against you. Saxe twitched. It's funny to hear you speak against compromise after the last 4 months, Frank. Anyway, I say it's better to up both the total and the percentage. The environmental costs are negligible. Managed right, they can mostly be turned into benefits. An economy can be measured in terawatts or kilocalories, like John used to say. And that's energy. And we can use energy here in any form. Even a lot of bodies. Bodies are just more work. Very versatile, very energetic. Real costs, Saxe. All of them. You're still trying to play at economics, but it isn't like physics. It's like politics. Think what will happen when millions of displaced Terran emigrants arrive here, with all their viruses, biological and psychic. Maybe they'll join Arcady or Anne. Ever thought of that? Epidemics running through the mob's body and mind. They could crash your whole system. Look, hasn't the Acheron group been trying to teach you biology? You should pay attention. This isn't mechanics, Saxe. It's ecology. And it's a fragile, managed ecology. So it has to be managed. Maybe, Sachs said. It was one of John's mannerisms, that phrase. Frank missed what Sachs was saying for a minute. Then his attention was captured again. This treaty isn't going to make all that much difference anyway. The transnationals that want to invest will find a way. They'll make a new flag of convenience, and it'll look like a country staking its claim here, exactly according to the treaty's quotas. But behind it will be a transnational money. There'll be all kinds of stuff happening, Frank. You know how it is. Politics, right? Economics, right? Maybe, Frank said, harshly upset. He walked away. Oh my god, it's delicious. Okay, later he found himself in the Upper Valley District, still being built. In Ann, sorry, not the. Maybe, Frank said, harshly upset. He walked away. Later, he found himself in an Upper Valley District, still being built. The scaffolding was extreme, as Sachs had said, especially for Martian G. Not in N. The scaffolding was extreme, as Sachs had said, especially for Martian G. Some of it looked like it would be hard to bring down. He turned and looked out over the valley. The city was nicely placed. It was hard to dispute. Or that was indisputable. The two sides of the valley meant there was going to be a lot visible from any point. Everywhere in town would have a view. Suddenly his wrist pad beeped, and he answered. It was Anne, staring up at him. What do you want? He snapped. I suppose you think I sold you out too. Let in the hordes to overrun your playground. She grimaced. No. You did the best that could be done, given the situation. That's what I wanted to say. She clicked off, and his pad went blank. Great, he said aloud. I've got everyone on Two Worlds mad at me except Anne Claiborne. He laughed bitterly, took off walking. Back down to the canal and the rows of Barris columns, Lot's wives. There were knots of celebrants scattered over the canal-side sward, and in the late afternoon light, their shadows were long. The sight took on a somehow ominous cast, and Frank turned, uncertain where to go. He didn't like the aftermath of things. Everything seemed finished, done, revealed as pointless. It was always this way. A group of Terrans were standing under one of the more magnificent new office blocks in the Niederdorf tent. There was I feel like his name is Andy Jans, but it's too late for me now. Andy Jans. And there was Andy Jans among them. Among us. If Anne was pleased, Andy would be furious. Frank walked up to him, wanting to witness that. Andy saw him, and his face went still for a moment. Frank Chalmers, he said. What brings you down here? His tone was amiable, but his eyes were unamused, even cold. Yes, he was angry. Frank, feeling better every second, said, "I'm just walking around. Just walking around, Andy, getting the blood flowing again. What about you?" After the briefest of hesitations, After the briefest of hesitations, Jans said, "We're looking at office space." He watched as Frank digested the implications of the statement. His smile took on an edge, became a genuine smile. He went on. "These are friends of mine from Ethiopia, from Addis Ababa. We were thinking of moving our home office there next year. And so," his smile broadened, no doubt in response to the look on Frank's face, which Frank could feel hardening over the front of his skull. "We have a lot to discuss." And we will save it for next week. Okay. For Al-Kahira. Thank you.